In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate a cast-on method that can be really useful when knitting swatches. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. The cast-on method that I'm going to show you today is basically a type of provisional cast-on method. But what's nice about using it when you are creating a swatch, whether it's a gauge swatch or just a swatch where you are experimenting with a stitch pattern or with a combination of yarn and stitch pattern, whatever it is you're trying to do with that swatch, this can be a really nice way of starting and finishing the swatch so that you can really evaluate just the stitch pattern without interference from a border or even a cast on edge, which can affect the ability of you to really see what a stitch pattern is doing. For example, in this lace swatch, if I really wanted to aggressively block it, I would be able to stretch it as much as I possibly could without worrying about the cast on edge and whether or not it's going to be able to stretch enough. I can evaluate just the fabric. And likewise, with a cable pattern, which is likely to pull in, I can start and end this swatch with the stitches on live stitches on a thread that allow me to draw the edges in at the bottom or spread them out as much as I need to, and then block the swatch with perfectly straight edges, and then really take good measurements. You can use it with stockinette swatches. I don't tend to use this method with stockinette swatch, but I do find it really useful for this type of swatch where I'm evaluating a stitch pattern that I want to really understand the fabric of the stitch pattern without a border or a cast on edge. So what you need is a length of waste yarn, and you want it to be a really smooth waste yarn. It doesn't have to be the same yarn weight. It could be a little bit thinner than your project yarn, but it should be nice and smooth. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the two strands and start with a slip knot, and just to join the two yarns together and create some tension on them while you're doing the actual cast on. So you work the slip knot together, put it on the needle, and then you can get ready to cast on. You're going to start like you would with a long tail cast on. So you're going to have your thumb and forefinger are going to go between these two strands. You're going to have your project yarn over your index finger, and you're going to have the waste yarn in front of your thumb, and then you're going to grasp the two strands like this. So you're starting as if you were working a long tail cast on, but you won't be doing a long tail cast on. There are two different actions for getting loops on the needles. One of the actions is to simply do a yarn over, and you do that by bringing your working needle behind the project yarn and underneath it, and then just letting it sit on the needle. So you can see that it's angling to the left. So that's just a yarn over. The other way you get loops on the needle is to bring the working needle over and in front of the waste yarn, bring it under so that you can grab that project yarn, get it on the needle, and come back around this way. And this type of stitch creates an actual locked stitch on the needle. So what you'll be doing as you're casting on is alternating between these two types of loops. You're going to alternate between a yarn over and then coming under the waste yarn to grab the yarn. Yarn over, under the waste yarn, to grab the project yarn. So those are going to be alternating. You want to finish your cast on by doing the type of loop where you come under the waste yarn to grab the yarn. You want to always finish with one of those because that will lock the stitches on the needle, whereas a yarn over won't. It'll be just a strand sitting on the needle. If you want an odd number of stitches, you will start by coming under the waste yarn to grab a loop for your first stitch. And then you will alternate between a yarn over and coming under the waste yarn to grab that project yarn. And so that means every odd stitch you do is going to be the type where you come under the waist yarn to grab the project yarn. So for an odd number of stitches, you start and finish with that stitch. If you are casting on an even number of stitches, then you start with the yarn over, because that will be your first stitch and every odd stitch. Your even stitches, including the last stitch, will be under the waist yarn, grabbing the project yarn. And then you just alternate until you have all of the stitches that you need. When you have completed your last cast on stitch, you want to make sure that you keep the tension on both of the strands of yarn while you turn the work. So I'm going to use my right hand to grab this strand and just keep it tight, and I'm going to continue holding on to the working yarn, the project yarn, with my left hand so that I can turn the work. And now you can see I've got it pinched against that needle. And now for this first row, you're going to just work across all of the stitches. If you hold the working yarn in your right hand when you knit, then you're going to want to keep this waist yarn pinched against that needle. While you work your first stitch, and then you can insert the needle and you can work with the yarn in your right hand. If you are a continental knitter and you keep the yarn in your left hand when you knit, then what you want to do is keep tension on this strand of yarn in your right hand. Keep the tension on it here while you have the working yarn in your left hand. So you'll just keep the tension on this yarn. I have it pinched right here on my finger. Keep a tension on here just for the first couple of stitches as you work across. So when I'm getting to this last stitch here, remember that this stitch that has both colors is that slip knot. That is not a stitch, and you can just let it slip off the needle like that. Swatching is done in order to gain information. The information you want from a swatch might be gauge, or it might be to see how you like a particular yarn and stitch pattern combination, or it might be to evaluate the characteristics of a stitch pattern without an edge or border interfering. The method I demonstrated today is not the only way to start and end a swatch, but it can be a useful method to have in your swatching repertoire. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.